Money can buy almost anything in this world: luxury cars, mansions, private jets, and designer clothes. But there was one thing that Marcus Wellington's fortune couldn't purchase: peace in his own home. The tech billionaire who had built an empire from nothing found himself defeated by two 4-year-old children who had turned his life upside down. In the past 18 months, 23 professional nannies had walked through the golden doors of the Wellington mansion. Each one arrived with impressive credentials, glowing references, and confidence that they could handle any child. Each one left within weeks, some within days, looking like they had survived a war zone. The twins, Emma and Ethan, had become legends among childcare agencies, the untamable children of one of America's wealthiest men. But sometimes the most unexpected person holds the key to the most impossible situation. Sometimes the answer comes not from expensive agencies or elite training programs, but from the most humble and overlooked places. This is the story of how a woman who cleaned floors and dusted furniture succeeded where Harvard-educated childcare specialists had failed. This is the story of how love, patience, and genuine understanding proved more powerful than all the money in the world. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about wealth, family, and the true meaning of care. It's a story that proves that sometimes the most valuable treasures are found in the most unexpected packages. Marcus Wellington stood in his marble-floored study, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens of his 20-acre estate. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds, but the beauty of his surroundings did nothing to calm the storm brewing inside his chest. His phone had been buzzing nonstop for the past hour with messages from his assistant, his business partners, and, most urgently, from Elite Childcare Solutions, the most expensive nanny agency in the country. The message was always the same. Another nanny had quit. This time, it was Ms. Catherine Hartwell, a woman with 15 years of experience caring for the children of celebrities and royalty. She had lasted exactly 4 days. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar headache building behind his eyes. At 35, he had conquered the tech world, building his company from a small startup in his garage to a multi-billion-dollar empire. He could negotiate million-dollar deals in his sleep, predict market trends with uncanny accuracy, and solve complex problems that stumped entire teams of experts. But when it came to his own children, he felt completely helpless. The twins had not always been like this. Emma and Ethan had been angels for the first 2 years of their lives, bright and curious children who filled the mansion with laughter. But everything changed after the accident. Marcus closed his eyes, tried to push away the memories that still haunted him 18 months later. The phone call from the hospital, the frantic drive through the city, the sterile smell of the emergency room where his world had shattered into a million pieces. His wife, Sarah, had been returning from a charity gala when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact killed her instantly. Marcus had been working late that night, as he so often did, chasing another deal, another victory. He had kissed her goodbye that morning without knowing it would be the last time. The guilt ate away at him like acid, especially when he saw how the children had changed. After Sarah's death, Emma and Ethan became different children entirely. They threw tantrums that could last for hours, destroyed furniture, refused to eat, and seemed determined to drive away anyone who tried to care for them. The behavioral specialist Marcus hired said it was trauma that children often acted out when they lost a parent. They recommended therapy, patience, and consistency, but knowing the reason didn't make living with it any easier. The first nanny to quit had been Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 50s who had come highly recommended. She lasted 3 weeks before Emma put glue in her hair while she slept, and Ethan flooded the bathroom by stuffing toys down the toilet. The second nanny quit after finding her car covered in finger paint. The third left after Ethan bit her so hard he drew blood. Marcus tried different approaches. He hired strict nannies who believed in discipline. They quit when the children's behavior escalated to breaking valuable antiques. He tried nurturing, motherly types who thought love could heal anything. They quit when their kindness was met with calculated cruelty. He even hired male nannies, thinking the children might respond better to a father figure. But they proved just as vulnerable to the twins' campaign of psychological warfare. The pattern was always the same. The new nanny would arrive full of confidence, armed with credentials from prestigious schools and years of experience. They would meet Marcus in his study, a room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a massive oak desk, discussing their approach to childcare with professional calm. Marcus would show them around the mansion. The children's playroom filled with every toy imaginable, their bedrooms decorated like something from a fairy tale, the outdoor playground that rivaled anything found in the finest parks. The nannies would nod approvingly, impressed by the resources at their disposal. They would discuss schedules, dietary requirements, and educational goals. Everything seemed perfect until they actually met Emma and Ethan. The children had developed an almost supernatural ability to identify weakness and exploit it. If a nanny was afraid of spiders, they would somehow find ways to introduce the creatures into her bedroom. If she was claustrophobic, they would lock her in closets. If she was particular about cleanliness, they would find creative ways to create massive messes that took hours to clean up. But it went beyond mere mischief. The twins seemed to understand exactly what would break each person's spirit. They would alternate between angelic behavior and complete chaos, keeping the nannies constantly off balance. Just when a caregiver thought she was making progress, the children would escalate their campaign, pushing boundaries until even the most patient professional reached their breaking point. Marcus had tried everything. He increased the salary to astronomical levels, offered bonuses for staying longer than a month, even provided separate living quarters so the nannies could have privacy and peace. Nothing worked. The children drove them all away with methodical precision. The hardest part was that Emma and Ethan were perfect angels when Marcus was around. They would run to him when he came home, climb into his lap for bedtime stories, and behave like normal children. It was only when he left for work that the chaos began. This led some nannies to suggest that Marcus himself was the problem, that the children were acting out because they needed their father's attention. But Marcus couldn't stay home. His company required constant oversight, and the demands of running a billion-dollar empire meant 12-hour days were the norm, not the exception. He had tried reducing his work hours, but the children's behavior remained unchanged. He had tried working from home, but found it impossible to concentrate with the sounds of battles raging throughout the house. The stress was affecting his work performance, and his business partners were beginning to notice. How could he run a company when he couldn't even manage his own household? The latest crisis had started at 6 in the morning when Ms. Hartwell called his cell phone, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. She had discovered that the twins had somehow gotten into her room during the night and cut off chunks of her hair while she slept. When she confronted them at breakfast, they had looked at her with innocent eyes and claimed they were trying to make her beautiful like their mommy. The calculated cruelty of it had broken something inside the experienced nanny. She had dealt with difficult children before, but never ones who seemed to understand exactly how to inflict maximum emotional damage. By the time Marcus arrived home from his morning meeting, she was already packed and loading her suitcase in her car. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wellington," she had said, her eyes red from crying. "I've worked with grieving children before, but Emma and Ethan, they're not just acting out. They're actively trying to hurt people. I can't help children who don't want to be helped." Marcus had watched her drive away, feeling the familiar sense of failure wash over him. He was a man who solved problems for a living, but his own children presented a puzzle that seemed impossible to crack. Every expert he consulted gave him the same advice: be patient, be consistent, show them love. But how could he do that when his children seemed determined to reject any form of care or affection from anyone other than him? The truth was that Marcus was drowning. He barely slept anymore, worried constantly about what chaos he would find when he returned home each day. His assistant had started scheduling all his important meetings for early morning hours because by afternoon, he was often dealing with whatever crisis the twins had created. His friends had stopped calling, tired of his constant cancellations when family emergencies arose. His dating life was non-existent. What woman would want to enter such chaos? Standing in his study that morning, looking out at gardens that had once brought him peace, Marcus felt more alone than ever. He had built an empire, accumulated wealth beyond most people's dreams, but none of it mattered if he couldn't provide a stable, loving home for his children. The mansion that had once been a symbol of his success now felt like a prison, beautiful, but filled with the echoes of his failures as a father. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Dr. Peterson, the child psychologist he had been consulting for months. Marcus reluctantly answered, knowing he would receive another lecture about patience and consistency, another recommendation for a therapeutic approach that would likely fail like all the others. "Marcus, I heard about Ms. Hartwell," Dr. Peterson said, his voice gentle but concerned. "I think we need to consider some more intensive interventions. Perhaps a residential facility where the children can receive round-the-clock therapeutic care." The suggestion hit Marcus like a physical blow. Send his children away? The thought of Emma and Ethan in some sterile institutional setting made his stomach turn. They had already lost their mother. How could he abandon them too? But the alternative seemed equally impossible. How long could this continue? How many more caregivers would the twins drive away before Marcus admitted defeat? As he hung up the phone, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the window. The man staring back at him looked older than his 35 years, with dark circles under his eyes and stress lines etched deep into his face. This wasn't the life he had envisioned when Sarah was alive, when they had dreamed of filling their beautiful home with children's laughter and family memories. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had everything money could buy, but he couldn't buy the one thing his family desperately needed: peace, stability, and someone who could truly understand and connect with his troubled children. As another long day stretched ahead of him, Marcus wondered if such a person even existed, or if he was chasing an impossible dream in a house full of beautiful things and broken hearts. The doorbell chimed at exactly 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, its elegant melody echoing through the marble halls of the Wellington mansion. Marcus looked up from his laptop where he had been trying to focus on quarterly projections, but his mind kept wandering to the empty rooms upstairs where his children were probably planning their next act of rebellion. He wasn't expecting anyone. The latest nanny agency had informed him they needed a week to find someone willing to take on the Wellington assignment. Apparently, word had spread through the childcare community about the impossible twins. Marcus had reluctantly arranged to work from home until a replacement could be found, though he knew his productivity would suffer. Through his study window, he could see a small, beat-up Honda Civic parked in his circular driveway, looking out of place among the manicured landscaping and marble statuary. The car was at least 10 years old, with a few dents and a faded paint job that spoke of hard use and careful maintenance. Marcus frowned, wondering if someone had gotten lost and was asking for directions. When he opened the front door, he found himself looking down at an African-American woman in her early 40s, wearing a simple navy blue dress and carrying a worn canvas bag. She was petite, barely reaching his shoulder, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. There was something immediately calming about her presence, a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her obviously modest circumstances. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Grace Matthews. I'm here about the childcare position." Marcus blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. I'm not expecting anyone today." The agency said. "I don't work for any agency," Grace interrupted gently. "I heard about your situation through a friend who works for one of the families in your neighborhood. I know you've been having difficulties finding someone to care for your children, and I'd like to help." Marcus studied her face, trying to understand what was happening. This woman didn't fit the profile of any nanny he had ever hired. She carried no leather portfolio filled with references, wore no expensive suit that screamed professional competence. Her hands were calloused from hard work, and there was a weariness around her eyes that spoke of someone who had seen real hardship. "I appreciate your interest, Ms. Matthews," Marcus said carefully, "but I should tell you that my children are particularly challenging. The last 23 nannies have all quit within a matter of weeks. Most of them had advanced degrees in child development. Grace smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. "Mr. Wellington, I've been cleaning houses and caring for other people's children for over 20 years. I've raised 4 children of my own, including 2 who lost their father when they were very young. I understand what grief can do to a child's heart. Degrees are nice, but they don't teach you how to love broken children back to wholeness." Something in her voice made Marcus pause. There was no arrogance in her words, no false confidence or promises she couldn't keep. Instead, there was a quiet certainty, as if she knew something about children that all the experts had missed. "May I ask what happened to your husband?" Marcus found himself saying, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Car accident, 8 years ago," Grace replied without flinching. "My youngest was only 6. I know what it's like to watch children struggle with loss, Mr. Wellington. I know how anger and fear can make them push away the very people trying to help them." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of crashing came from upstairs, followed by Emma's voice shouting something unintelligible. Grace didn't jump or look alarmed like every other potential caregiver had. Instead, she simply tilted her head slightly, as if listening for something specific in the chaos above. "They're testing to see if you'll come running," she said matter-of-factly. "Probably knocked over a lamp or dumped out a toy box. Nothing dangerous, just loud enough to get your attention." Marcus stared at her in amazement. She had been in his house for less than 5 minutes and had already diagnosed his children's behavior more accurately than some professionals who had spent weeks observing them. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because her children are the same everywhere, Mr. Wellington. Rich or poor, black or white, they all test the adults in their lives to see who's really going to stay. Your children aren't bad, they're scared. They're protecting themselves the only way they know how." Another crash echoed from upstairs, this one louder. Marcus started to move toward the staircase, but Grace's gentle voice stopped him. "If you go up there now, you'll just reinforce the behavior. They need to know that breaking things won't bring you running every time. They also need to know that the new person in their lives won't be scared away by a little noise." Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to check on his children, to make sure they were safe and not destroying anything irreplaceable. But something about Grace's calm confidence made him pause. "I can't offer you much," he said slowly. "The position comes with excellent benefits, and the salary is—" He started to name a figure that was probably more than Grace made in several years of house cleaning. "Mr. Wellington," Grace interrupted again, raising her hand. "I'm not here for the money. I'm here because those children upstairs need someone who understands their pain. Money can't heal a broken heart. Only love and patience can do that." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a small spark of hope he had almost given up on. This woman was unlike anyone he had ever met in his business or personal life. In a world where everyone seemed to have an agenda, where relationships were often transactional and people were motivated by what they could gain, Grace Matthews appeared to be offering something he hadn't encountered in years: genuine care without expectation of reward. "Would you like to meet them?" he asked. Grace nodded and followed him toward the staircase. As they climbed the marble steps, Marcus found himself explaining the layout of the house, pointing out the children's playroom, their individual bedrooms, and the study area where previous nannies had attempted to maintain some semblance of educational routine. When they reached the top of the stairs, they found Emma and Ethan standing in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by the contents of an overturned toy chest. Wooden blocks, stuffed animals, books, and art supplies were scattered across the expensive Persian rug like the aftermath of a small explosion. The twins stood defiantly in the center of the mess, their identical blue eyes challenging Marcus to react. Emma, with her long blonde curls and delicate features that reminded Marcus painfully of Sarah, crossed her arms and lifted her chin. Ethan, slightly taller but sharing his sister's stubborn expression, stepped protectively in front of Emma, as if shielding her from adult disapproval. "We had an accident, Daddy," Emma said, her voice dripping with false innocence. The toy box just fell over all by itself. Marcus started to speak, ready to give his usual lecture about telling the truth and cleaning up after themselves, but Grace stepped forward before he could say anything. She didn't scold the children or demand explanations. Instead, she simply knelt down among the scattered toys and began picking them up, sorting them into neat piles. "Accidents happen," she said conversationally, as if talking to adults rather than misbehaving children. "I once spilled a whole gallon of paint in my living room. Took me 3 days to clean it all up. Good thing it was washable paint." The twins stared at her in confusion. This wasn't the reaction they were expecting. Previous caregivers had either gotten angry or tried to lecture them about responsibility. Grace seemed genuinely unconcerned about the mess, treating it as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Emma recovered first. "You're supposed to be mad at us," she said suspiciously. "Why would I be mad?" Grace asked, continuing to sort toys. "These are your things. If you want to play with them on the floor, instead of keeping them in the box, that's your choice. Though it might be easier to find what you're looking for if they're organized." Ethan frowned. "The other ladies always yelled when we made messes." "Well, I'm not the other ladies," Grace replied simply. "I'm Grace, and I've seen much bigger messes than this. Once my son decided to see what would happen if he mixed flour and water in the kitchen while I was doing laundry. He covered the entire room in paste. It looked like a snowstorm had hit indoors." Despite themselves, the twins seemed intrigued. Emma crept closer, careful not to appear too interested. "What did you do to him?" she asked. "I handed him a mop, and we cleaned it up together," Grace said. "Then I taught him how to make proper bread dough, so he could experiment with flour and water in a way that would give us something delicious to eat." Marcus watched this exchange with fascination. Grace wasn't trying to establish dominance or lay down rules like every other caregiver had done. She wasn't even addressing the obvious fact that the children had deliberately dumped out the toys to test her reaction. Instead, she was treating them like intelligent people whose choices deserved respect, even if those choices created extra work. Ethan walked over and picked up a wooden block, examining it as if seeing it for the first time. "Our mommy used to make bread," he said quietly. The admission hung in the air like a delicate bubble that might burst if anyone moved too suddenly. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. The children rarely mentioned Sarah anymore, and when they did, it was usually followed by tears or tantrums. "I bet she made wonderful bread," Grace said softly, continuing to sort toys without making a big deal of Ethan's revelation. "Mothers who bake put love into everything they make. That's what makes it taste so special." Emma sat down cross-legged beside Grace, her defiance melting away. "She made cookies too, chocolate chip ones with nuts." "Those sound delicious," Grace replied. "I'd love to hear more about your mother's baking. Maybe someday you could help me make some cookies in her honor." Marcus held his breath, waiting for the inevitable shutdown. The twins never talked about Sarah for more than a few seconds before becoming upset or angry. But instead of pulling away, Emma leaned closer to Grace. "She used to let us lick the spoon when she made frosting," Emma whispered, as if sharing a precious secret. "The best part," Grace agreed solemnly. "Frosting always tastes better when you're helping make it." Even Ethan abandoned his suspicious stance and came to sit beside his sister. Within minutes, all three of them were sitting on the floor, sorting toys and sharing memories of Sarah's cooking. The mess that had been designed to drive away another caregiver had become an opportunity for connection and healing. Marcus realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. In less than 30 minutes, this unassuming woman had accomplished what teams of child psychologists and behavior specialists had failed to achieve in months of therapy. She hadn't used any special techniques or professional interventions. She had simply treated his children like human beings deserving of respect and understanding. As he watched Grace laugh at one of Ethan's silly jokes, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. Maybe, just maybe, his children weren't doomed to drive away every potential caregiver. Maybe they just needed someone who understood that beneath their difficult behavior were two small hearts trying to cope with an unimaginable loss. For the first time in 18 months, the Wellington Mansion felt like it might become a home again. Grace's first week at the Wellington Mansion unfolded like no other caregiver's tenure had before. Instead of the usual pattern of escalating chaos followed by resignation, something different was happening. The children were still testing boundaries, still trying to discover what would make this new person leave, but Grace's responses continued to surprise them at every turn. On her second day, Emma decided to test Grace's patience with food. During breakfast, she deliberately knocked over her glass of orange juice, watching Grace's face for signs of anger or frustration. Instead of scolding or demanding an apology, Grace simply handed Emma a paper towel and said, "Spills happen. Let's clean it up together, and I'll get you a new glass." The matter-of-fact response deflated Emma's defiant mood. She had expected drama, consequences, or at the very least some visible irritation. But Grace treated the incident as if it were genuinely accidental, removing the power struggle that Emma had been trying to initiate. Ethan tried a different approach the same day. He announced that he hated all vegetables and would only eat candy for lunch. Previous nannies had either tried to force him to eat healthy food or engaged in lengthy negotiations about nutritional requirements. Grace surprised him by nodding thoughtfully and saying, "Okay, you can have candy for lunch, but let's also make sure you have some protein and something to drink so your body has energy for playing." She proceeded to make him a peanut butter sandwich, serve it alongside a few pieces of his requested candy, and didn't mention vegetables at all. Ethan ate the sandwich without complaint, confused by the lack of conflict. By dinner time, when Grace prepared a colorful meal that included roasted carrots cut into fun shapes, he found himself trying them without being asked. The vegetables became an exploration rather than a battle. Marcus observed these interactions with growing amazement. He had spent months dreading meal times, knowing they would likely turn into power struggles that left everyone frustrated and the children hungry. Grace had somehow transformed the dining room from a battlefield into a place where food was enjoyed and conversation flowed naturally. But it wasn't just the practical aspects of childcare where Grace excelled. She seemed to understand the emotional landscape of grief in ways that impressed even Marcus. When Emma broke down in tears because she couldn't remember exactly what her mother's voice sounded like, Grace didn't try to distract her or minimize her pain. Instead, she sat with Emma on the floor of the playroom and let her cry. "It's scary when memories start to fade," Grace said softly, stroking Emma's hair. "But you know what? Your mother's love isn't in her voice that you can or can't remember. It's in the way you wrinkle your nose when you laugh, just like she did. It's in how gentle you are with your stuffed animals. It's in the way you always share your snacks with your brother. Those things don't fade because they're part of who you are." Emma looked up at Grace with red-rimmed eyes. Really, Grace confirmed. "Love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It just changes shape. Instead of hearing your mother's voice, you get to carry her love inside your heart forever." Marcus, who had been listening from the doorway, found himself blinking back tears. In all the months of professional therapy and counseling, no one had explained loss to his children in such simple, comforting terms. Grace had a gift for making complex emotions understandable without being patronizing. Ethan presented different challenges. His grief manifested as anger, and he had developed a habit of breaking things when he felt overwhelmed. On Grace's third day, he deliberately smashed a ceramic figurine that had been his mother's favorite. It was an expensive piece, part of a collection Sarah had started during their honeymoon in Italy. Previous caregivers would have been horrified by the destruction of such a valuable item. Grace looked at the broken pieces scattered across the hardwood floor and then at Ethan, who stood with clenched fists, waiting for punishment or anger. Instead, she knelt down and began carefully collecting the fragments. "This must have been very special to your mother," she said quietly. "It's beautiful, even broken." Ethan's defiance wavered. "I didn't mean to break it," he whispered, the lie obvious to everyone. "Sometimes we break things when we're feeling broken inside," Grace replied, continuing to gather pieces. "It doesn't make us bad people. It just means we're hurting and don't know how to express it." She held up a larger fragment, examining the delicate painted flowers that decorated the ceramic surface. You know what? I think we can fix this. It won't look exactly the same, but sometimes broken things can become even more beautiful when they're mended with care. Over the next few days, Grace and Ethan worked together to repair the figurine using a Japanese technique called kintsugi, where broken pottery is mended with gold. Grace had learned the art form years earlier when helping her own children deal with their father's death. As they carefully applied the golden adhesive to the cracks, Grace talked about how people like pottery could be made stronger and more beautiful by their experiences with being broken and healed. The gold lines show where the breaks happened, she explained as Ethan concentrated on holding a piece in place. They don't hide the damage. They make it part of the beauty. Just like how missing your mother doesn't make you broken forever. It makes you special because you know how precious love is. Ethan stared at the figurine, now decorated with delicate golden veins where the cracks had been. It looks different than before. Different, but still beautiful, Grace agreed. Maybe even more beautiful, because it has a story to tell about surviving something difficult. The metaphor wasn't lost on Marcus, who found himself thinking about his own broken places and wondering if they, too, could be transformed into something meaningful. He had spent so many months focused on trying to return his family to what it had been before Sarah's death, but Grace was teaching his children and him that healing didn't mean going back. It meant moving forward with the cracks acknowledged and honored. By the end of the first week, the changes in the household were undeniable. The constant tension that had pervaded the mansion for months was beginning to lift. The children still had difficult moments, still grieved their mother, and acted out their confusion, but these episodes were becoming learning opportunities rather than destructive cycles. Grace had also begun to understand the unique personalities beneath the twins' grief. Emma was naturally nurturing and creative, drawn to art projects and caring for others. When Grace arrived one morning with a scraped knee from tripping on her front steps, Emma immediately ran to get a bandage and insisted on taking care of Grace just like Grace took care of them. The role reversal delighted the little girl and gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life. Ethan, meanwhile, was a natural engineer and problem solver. He loved taking things apart to see how they worked and building elaborate structures with blocks and household items. Grace encouraged this curiosity, even when it meant temporarily sacrificing the pristine appearance of certain rooms. She understood that his need to understand and control his physical environment was connected to his struggle to understand and control his emotions. The transformation wasn't just happening with the children. Marcus found himself looking forward to coming home each evening, eager to hear about the day's discoveries and adventures. Grace had a gift for finding wonder in ordinary moments. A butterfly that landed on the garden window during lunch, the way afternoon light made rainbows through a crystal vase, the perfect tower that Ethan built before Emma accidentally knocked it over with her enthusiastic dancing. These small moments, which Marcus had forgotten to notice in his grief and stress, began to feel like gifts. Grace helped him see that his children were not just broken beings to be fixed, but fascinating individuals with their own perspectives and insights. When Emma announced that clouds were just the sky's way of crying happy tears, or when Ethan decided that their goldfish was probably a secret spy reporting back to fish headquarters, Grace encouraged their imagination rather than correcting their fantastical logic. The other staff members in the house began to notice the changes too. Mrs. Chun, the longtime housekeeper, remarked that she could hear laughter coming from the children's rooms again. Carlos, the groundskeeper, mentioned that the twins had started coming outside to play in the garden instead of staying locked in their rooms. Even Jonathan, Marcus's personal assistant, commented that his employers seemed more relaxed and focused during business calls. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Emma and Ethan talked about their mother. Instead of the painful silence or explosive emotions that had characterized any mention of Sarah for months, the children began sharing memories naturally and without distress. Grace had created a safe space where Sarah's presence could be honored rather than avoided. One evening, as Grace was getting ready to leave for the day, Emma tugged on her dress and looked up with serious eyes. "Grace, are you going to stay with us?" The question hung in the air, loaded with all the fears and hopes that the children had learned to carry. They had been abandoned by death once, and by choice 23 times. Their ability to trust was fragile, rebuilt one gentle interaction at a time. Grace knelt down to Emma's level and took her small hands in her larger ones. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. As long as your daddy wants me here, and you want me here, this is where I'll be. Promise?" Ethan asked, appearing beside his sister with equal seriousness. "I promise," Grace replied solemnly. "I don't make promises I can't keep." For the first time since their mother's death, the twins smiled genuine, unguarded smiles, the kind of expressions that lit up their entire faces and reminded Marcus of the joyful children they had been before tragedy stole their innocence. As Marcus watched this exchange, he realized that something miraculous had happened in his home. Grace Matthews hadn't just succeeded where others had failed. She had shown his family a path toward healing that none of them had been able to see before. In a world where he had been able to buy everything except peace, she had brought the one thing money couldn't purchase: authentic love and understanding. The mansion was beginning to feel like a home again, filled with the sound of children's laughter and the quiet wisdom of a woman who understood that sometimes the most powerful healing happens not through professional techniques or expensive interventions, but through the simple act of seeing broken hearts and choosing to stay. 3 months into Grace's tenure at the Wellington Mansion, the first real crisis arose. It began on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning when Emma woke up with a fever. What started as a simple childhood illness quickly escalated into something that tested every bond Grace had carefully built with the family. Emma's temperature spiked to 103 degrees during the night, and by morning she was delirious and calling for her mother. Ethan, terrified by his sister's condition and traumatized by memories of the night their mother never came home, barricaded himself in his closet and refused to come out. Marcus, triggered by the same fears that haunted his son, paced the house like a caged animal, making frantic phone calls to doctors and contemplating rushing Emma to the emergency room. Grace found herself at the center of a family crisis that went far deeper than one child's fever. She was dealing with a medical emergency complicated by layers of grief, trauma, and terror that stretched back 18 months to the night that had shattered this family's world. "We need to take her to the hospital," Marcus said for the 4th time in 10 minutes, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "What if something's seriously wrong? What if we wait too long?" And he couldn't finish the sentence, but Grace understood. He was reliving the night he had waited too long to call Sarah, the night he had assumed she would come home safely and hadn't worried when she was running late. "She has the flu, Mr. Wellington," Grace said calmly, placing a cool cloth on Emma's forehead. "I've seen this exact pattern many times. The fever is high, but her breathing is clear and her color is good. Dr. Peterson said to call if it goes above 104 or if she develops other symptoms." But Marcus wasn't hearing medical reassurances. He was lost in memories of hospital corridors and devastating phone calls. Grace realized that this crisis wasn't really about Emma's flu. It was about a father's terror that he might lose another person he loved while he was supposed to be protecting them. Meanwhile, Ethan's muffled sobs echoed from inside his closet. Grace could hear him talking to himself, repeating the same phrase over and over: "Please don't go away. Please don't go away. Please don't go away." Grace made a decision that went against every professional protocol she had ever learned. She called her own daughter, Maria, who was a registered nurse, and asked her to come to the house immediately. Then she sat down outside Ethan's closet door and began to talk to him through the wooden barrier. "Ethan, sweetheart, I know you're scared. When people we love get sick, it reminds us of other times when we were scared. But Emma just has the flu. It's the same sickness that made you feel yucky last winter. Remember? You got better in a few days, and so will she. But what if she doesn't? Ethan's voice was small and muffled. What if she goes away like Mommy did? Grace felt her heart break for this little boy who had learned too young that the people you love could disappear without warning. Ethan, your mommy didn't go away because she was sick with flu. Something very different happened to her. Something that was nobody's fault and couldn't be prevented. Emma getting flu is not the same thing. How do you know? Ethan challenged, his voice cracking with emotion. Because I'm going to take care of her just like I take care of you. And your daddy is here, and we're watching her very carefully. We're not going to let anything bad happen. It took 2 hours, but eventually Ethan emerged from the closet, tear-streaked and exhausted. He immediately ran to Emma's room to check on his sister, and Grace's heart ached at the sight of a 4-year-old boy trying to carry such enormous emotional burdens. When Maria arrived, she brought not just professional medical knowledge, but also a calmness that helped stabilize the entire household. She examined Emma thoroughly, confirmed Grace's assessment that it was indeed just flu, and showed Marcus how to monitor his daughter's condition without panicking at every fluctuation in temperature. Your children are lucky to have Grace, Maria told Marcus as they stood in the hallway outside Emma's room. Most people don't understand that caring for grieving children means caring for the whole family system. She's not just keeping your kids safe, she's helping all of you heal. Over the next few days, as Emma slowly recovered, Grace witnessed something beautiful emerge from the crisis. Marcus, instead of retreating into work as he usually did when emotions became intense, stayed home to help care for his daughter. Ethan, rather than acting out his fears through destructive behavior, channeled his worry into gentle caregiving, bringing Emma water and reading her picture books. The family that emerged from Emma's illness was different from the one that had entered it. They had faced their deepest fears together and discovered that they could survive difficult moments without falling apart. Marcus realized that medical emergencies didn't automatically equal loss. Ethan learned that sickness could be temporary and manageable, and Emma experienced being cared for by people who stayed present even when she was at her most vulnerable. But the real test of Grace's place in the family came a few weeks later when Marcus received an unexpected phone call from his mother-in-law, Sarah's mother, announcing that she was coming for an extended visit. Margaret Thornton was a formidable woman who had never approved of Marcus and had blamed him for Sarah's death. In her mind, if he had been a better husband who didn't work such long hours, Sarah would have been home that night instead of driving back from charity event. The fact that Marcus had been unable to manage his own children after Sarah's death only confirmed Margaret's belief that her son-in-law was fundamentally inadequate. Margaret arrived on a Thursday afternoon, sweeping into the mansion with the authority of someone who believed she had every right to take charge. She was a tall, elegant woman in her 60s, with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon and clothes that spoke of old money and social position. She took one look at Grace and immediately made her disapproval clear. "I wasn't aware you had hired household staff to raise my grandchildren," Margaret said to Marcus, her voice dripping with disdain. "I think Emma and Ethan need proper care from someone with actual qualifications, not someone who cleans houses for a living." Grace felt the familiar sting of class prejudice, but she had faced worse in her life. What concerned her more was how the children would be affected by this new source of conflict in their home. Emma and Ethan had just begun to feel secure again, and now they were witnessing another adult challenge Grace's place in their lives. Margaret's visit began exactly as Grace had feared. The older woman immediately began criticizing Grace's methods, questioning her decisions, and suggesting that the children needed proper discipline and structured learning rather than the permissive chaos she observed. When she found Emma and Ethan making cookies with Grace in the kitchen, flour dusting their clothes, and giggles filling the air, Margaret was horrified. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she announced to Marcus when he came home that evening. "Children should be learning proper behavior, not making messes with the hired help. Emma and Ethan need structure, education, and supervision by someone with appropriate credentials." But Emma and Ethan had their own opinions about their grandmother's suggestions. When Margaret tried to enforce a rigid schedule that separated them from Grace during educational time, the twins rebelled with a creativity and coordination that reminded Marcus of their mother's stubborn streak. They refused to participate in the structured activities Margaret planned, asking constantly where Grace was and when they could play with her again. When Margaret tried to criticize Grace in front of the children, Emma stood up with 4-year-old fierceness and declared, "Grace is the best. She takes care of us better than anybody." Ethan, not to be outdone by his sister's loyalty, added, "Grace understands about missing Mommy. She doesn't tell us to stop being sad." The confrontation that had been building for days finally erupted on Saturday evening. Margaret cornered Marcus in his study and demanded that he fire Grace immediately. "She's turning those children against proper authority," Margaret declared. "Emma and Ethan need guidance from someone who understands their social position and can prepare them for their responsibilities as members of our family. This woman is filling their heads with inappropriate ideas about equality and emotion." Marcus felt something click into place as he listened to his mother-in-law's demands. For months after Sarah's death, he had been so consumed by guilt and grief that he had accepted Margaret's criticisms of his parenting and his character. But watching Grace with his children had shown him what real love and care looked like. He wasn't going to let anyone destroy the peace his family had finally found. "Grace stays," he said quietly but firmly. "She has given my children something that all the qualified professionals couldn't: stability, understanding, and genuine affection. Emma and Ethan are happier and healthier than they've been since Sarah died." "You're making a mistake," Margaret warned. "These children need proper guidance, not emotional coddling from someone who doesn't understand their position in society." "What they need is love," Marcus replied, "and Grace gives them that without conditions or expectations. She's not trying to mold them into something they're not. She's helping them heal from losing their mother." The argument continued for another hour, but Marcus's position remained unchanged. By Sunday morning, Margaret was packing her bags, making it clear that she disapproved of the entire household and would be reconsidering her relationship with her grandchildren. Grace found Marcus sitting alone in his study that evening, staring out at the gardens where Emma and Ethan were chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I'm sorry my presence caused problems with your family," she said quietly. Marcus looked up at her, this remarkable woman who had transformed his children's lives without asking for recognition or reward. "Grace, you didn't cause any problems. You solved them." "Margaret, she means well, but she doesn't understand that grief can't be scheduled or structured away. You help my children heal by accepting them exactly as they are." "Children know when they're truly loved," Grace replied simply. Emma and Ethan needed someone who could see past their behavior to their hearts. They're good children who are hurting. Now, they're good children who are learning to be happy again. As they watched the twins playing together in the garden, their laughter floating through the evening air, Marcus realized that Grace had given his family something immeasurably precious. She had shown them that love wasn't about meeting expectations or maintaining appearances. It was about staying present with people through their darkest moments and believing in their capacity to heal. The mansion felt more like home than it ever had, even when Sarah was alive. There was a peace here now, a sense that this family could weather any storm because they had learned how to take care of each other's hearts as well as their physical needs. Grace Matthews had not just succeeded where 23 other caregivers had failed. She had shown the Wellington family what it meant to be truly seen, accepted, and loved without conditions. And in doing so, she had healed not just the children, but their father as well. 1 year after Grace Matthews first walked through the marble doors of the Wellington mansion, the house had transformed into something unrecognizable from the chaos Marcus had once known. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible to imagine 18 months earlier. Emma and Ethan sitting at the breakfast table, chattering excitedly about their plans for the day, while Grace hummed softly as she prepared their lunchboxes. The children had grown in ways that went far beyond their physical development. Emma, now 5 and preparing for kindergarten, had blossomed into a confident, caring little girl who approached the world with curiosity rather than defiance. She had started a small garden in the backyard with Grace's help, learning to nurture seedlings and celebrate their growth. Her favorite activity was reading stories to her stuffed animals, showing the same patience and gentleness that Grace had shown her during her darkest days. Ethan had channeled his engineering mind into constructive projects that amazed everyone around him. With Grace's encouragement, he had built elaborate marble runs that snaked through multiple rooms, constructed fairy houses for Emma's garden inhabitants, and even designed a pulley system to deliver messages between his bedroom and his sister's. His anger had transformed into determination, his destructive impulses redirected into creative problem-solving. But the most remarkable change was in how the twins related to their mother's memory. What had once been a source of overwhelming pain had become a treasured part of their daily lives. Sarah's photographs were displayed throughout the house again, and the children spoke of her naturally and without distress. They had incorporated their mother's memory into their present lives rather than being haunted by her absence. Grace had helped them create new traditions that honored Sarah while allowing the family to move forward. Every month on the anniversary of Sarah's death, they would have a special dinner featuring her favorite foods and share their happiest memories of her. Emma had started a journal where she drew pictures of things she wanted to tell her mother, and Ethan had built a memory box where he kept small treasures that reminded him of her. Marcus, watching his children thrive, had undergone his own transformation. The guilt that had consumed him for months had gradually given way to gratitude for the time he had had with Sarah, for the beautiful children she had given him, and for the unexpected gift of Grace's presence in their lives. He had learned to be fully present during his time at home, understanding that his children needed his attention more than his empire needed his constant oversight. The business world had initially been skeptical when Marcus began setting firmer boundaries around his work schedule. But, to everyone's surprise, his company had actually become more profitable under his more balanced leadership style. He made better decisions when he wasn't exhausted and stressed, delegated more effectively when he trusted his team to handle responsibilities, and inspired greater loyalty from employees who saw him modeling healthy work-life integration. On this particular morning, as Grace packed the children's lunches with the same care she brought to everything else, Marcus found himself reflecting on how dramatically his priorities had shifted. A year ago, his biggest concerns had been stock prices and market share. Now, his greatest joy was hearing Emma read a new book aloud or watching Ethan explain how his latest contraption worked. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There had been difficult days when grief unexpectedly overwhelmed one of them, moments when old fears surfaced, and times when progress seemed to stall. But Grace had taught them that healing wasn't about avoiding difficult emotions. It was about learning to experience them without being destroyed by them. She had also helped Marcus navigate the complex world of single parenthood in ways that extended far beyond childcare. When Emma had asked why she didn't have a mommy like her friends did, Grace had helped Marcus explain loss in terms a child could understand. When Ethan had behavioral setbacks during stressful periods, Grace had shown Marcus how to respond with patience rather than panic. The other staff members in the house had noticed the changes too. Mrs. Chun, the housekeeper, often remarked that the mansion felt alive again. Carlos, the groundskeeper, loved watching the children play in areas of the garden that had been neglected during their difficult period. Even Jonathan, Marcus's assistant, had commented that his employer seemed like a completely different person, calmer, more focused, and genuinely happy. But perhaps the most significant indicator of the family's healing was what happened when Marcus began dating again. After months of gentle encouragement from Grace, who believed that the children needed to see their father building a full life, Marcus had started occasionally going out with women he met through business or social connections. The children's reaction had been the true test of their emotional growth. Instead of the jealousy or fear of abandonment that Marcus had expected, Emma and Ethan had approached his dating with mature curiosity. They asked thoughtful questions about the women he spent time with, and even offered their own opinions about whom they liked and why. I think MS. Jennifer is nice, Emma had announced after meeting one of Marcus's friends. She listens when we talk, just like Grace does. Ethan had been more practical in his assessment. I like that she doesn't try to hug us right away. Grace says some people need time to feel comfortable with new friends. The children's ability to accept new people into their lives, to trust that love could expand rather than replace existing bonds, showed how thoroughly Grace had healed their capacity for attachment. They no longer saw the world as a dangerous place where people disappeared without warning. Instead, they understood that while some losses were permanent, new connections could be formed without threatening existing ones. Grace had accomplished this remarkable transformation not through any revolutionary techniques or expensive interventions, but through the consistent application of unconditional love, infinite patience, and genuine respect for the children's intelligence and emotional complexity. She had never tried to replace their mother or pretend that their grief wasn't valid. Instead, she had shown them that it was possible to honor their loss while still embracing life's possibilities. The success of Grace's approach had not gone unnoticed in the broader community. Word had spread among Marcus's wealthy neighbors about the woman who had succeeded where so many others had failed. Grace had begun receiving offers from other families desperate for her help with their own challenging children. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The same social circles that had initially dismissed Grace because of her background were now competing for her attention. But Grace had no interest in leaving the Wellington family. She had found something precious in this house, not just employment, but a sense of purpose and belonging that went far beyond any salary. The children had become like her own grandchildren, and Marcus had become not just an employer, but a friend whose respect and gratitude meant more to her than any amount of money. On this anniversary morning, as the family prepared for another ordinary day that would have been impossible a year earlier, Marcus made a decision he had been contemplating for months. He called Grace into his study and asked her to sit down. "Grace," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "I want you to know that you saved our family. Emma and Ethan are the happy, confident children they are today because of your love and wisdom. But more than that, you taught me how to be a better father." Grace smiled, the same gentle expression that had comforted his children through so many difficult moments. "Mr. Wellington, you were always a good father. You just needed to learn how to forgive yourself for being human." "I have something for you," Marcus continued, pulling out a legal document. "I've been thinking about how to show my gratitude for what you've done for us. Money doesn't seem adequate for the gift you've given our family. So I've had my lawyers prepare something different." He handed her the papers. Grace read through them slowly, her eyes widening as she understood what she was seeing. This is a deed to a house," she whispered. "It's in the neighborhood where your grandchildren live," Marcus explained. "I know you've been renting that apartment for years, and I know how much you miss being close to your family. The house is yours, with no mortgage, no strings attached. You've given us a home. Now I want to give you one." Tears filled Grace's eyes as she looked at the man who had become so much more than an employer. In a world where her work had often been invisible and undervalued, Marcus had seen her true worth and honored it in a way that would change her life forever. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll still come here every day," Marcus replied with a smile. "The children would never forgive me if I lost you. These children are part of my heart now," Grace assured him. "You couldn't get rid of me if you tried." As they sat in the study where Marcus had once felt so alone and defeated, both of them could hear Emma and Ethan playing in the garden, their laughter floating through the windows like music. The mansion that had once echoed with the silence of grief now rang with the sounds of a family that had learned how to live and love again. Grace Matthews had come to the Wellington mansion as a last resort, a desperate attempt to find someone who could manage two impossible children. She had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, but not by controlling or changing the children. Instead, she had seen past their difficult behavior to their wounded hearts and had loved them back to wholeness. In doing so, she had proven something that all of Marcus's wealth and education had failed to teach him. That the most valuable things in life, love, healing, understanding, and connection, couldn't be bought or earned through achievement. They could only be given freely, received gratefully, and shared generously. The Millionaire's twins who had driven away 23 nannies had finally found what they had been searching for all along. Not someone who would try to control them or fix them, but someone who would simply love them exactly as they were. And in return, they had given Grace something equally precious, a family who saw her true worth and treasured her presence in their lives. As the sun set over the Wellington mansion that evening, Marcus stood at his study window, watching Grace read bedtime stories to Emma and Ethan in the garden. The scene was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. A family created not by blood or marriage, but by choice, love, and the understanding that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we build together from the broken pieces of our separate lives. The mansion was finally, truly a home.